Okay, I want to welcome everybody to our regular Wednesday SEFS seminar. This is a little bit of a special one because we have welcome alumna guest here, Vicki Christiansen, who's Chief of the Forest Service. And before we get started, though, I want to acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations, recognizing that this is the land on which the University of Washington sits and its unceded territories, and also that Vicki, you're somewhere else and Paul is somewhere else, but we wish we could be gathering in person on this place, but really grateful that we were able to make it work remotely as we're doing so. So I'm going to first introduce Vicki and then also welcome Paul Anderson, who is the acting station director at the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station, who's joined us today as well. First, Vicki Christiansen serves as chief of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service, leading a workforce of more than 28,000 permanent employees who steward 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands, support the world's largest forestry research organization, and work with states, tribes, and others to sustain forests in the U.S. so they can benefit all citizens today and in the future. Over her 39-year career, she's accumulated a wealth of experience in natural resource and wildland fire management. Her commitment to the core values of the Forest Service, which are conservation, service, interdependence, diversity, and safety, is evident in the priorities she sets for the agency. As chief, Vicki is leading agency efforts to improve the conditions of America's forests and grasslands by modernizing how we do business to increase active forest management and deliver landscape conservation through shared stewardship with local, state, and national partners and tribes. Vicki's focus on relationships inside and outside the agency is reflected in the Forest Service's dedication to caring for the land, communities, and people it serves. We're very proud that Vicki graduated from what is now SEFS in 1983 with a Bachelor of Science degree. Vicki joined the Forest Service in 2010 as Deputy Director of Fire and Aviation Management. Prior to serving as chief, she worked as Deputy Chief for State and Private Forestry. Before joining the Forest Service, she served as the Arizona State Forester, Director of the Arizona Division of Forestry, and as the Washington State Forester, culminating a 26-year career with the Washington Department of Natural Resources. And as I mentioned, we're very grateful that Paul Anderson is joining us as well. And Vicki has said he's going to take the hard questions. And Paul is, as I mentioned, currently acting station director at the PNW Pacific Northwest Research Station of the U.S. Forest Service.
Hey, Dan, I don't mean to interrupt you, but he is the station director. He was named the permanent station director. Sorry, we didn't get that.
Oh, thank you for correcting that.
You bet.
And congratulations, Paul. I missed that announcement. The station employs about 300, including approximately 70 research scientists in Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. The research mission encompasses 5 major programs: ecosystems, process and function, goods, services, and values, land and watershed management, threat characterization and management, and resource monitoring and inventory. As a scientist and administrator, Paul has been engaged in forestry research since 1977 in the Lake States, the Sierra Nevada, and the Pacific Northwest. His work as a scientist has been focused on ecophysiology and silviculture, looking at forest vegetation responses to pollutant, climate, and competition stressors, and the development of silvicultural approaches to meet diverse societal and ecological objectives. As a program manager, he has facilitated the research activities of 5 research teams addressing vegetation and environmental dynamics, aquatic, riparian, and watershed systems, ecology and monitoring of wildlife, range management, boreal ecology, and decision sciences across Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. Now, with that long introduction, but clearly well-deserved and reflecting of the accomplishments of our guests, I welcome you both, Vicki and Paul, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. I'm going to share my screen here and just say thank you for the invitation to come back, although virtually, to my alma mater. I had so much growth there at the University of Washington, at the time, College of Forest Resources. And I come to you from Northern Virginia, just across the river is Washington, D.C., and I'm in the native homelands of the Powhatan people. And, you know, I just love connecting people to nature and to natural resources. And you all are the conservation leaders now and certainly for the future. And, you know, I was lucky enough to make that connection early in life because I grew up on our small family forest in rural Olalla. If you don't know where that is, it's between Gig Harbor and Bremerton. And it's certainly not far from Seattle. And, you know, I play outside on our acreage, our forest acreage, wandering through the Douglas fir and the western red cedar forest along the salmon-bearing stream. And I fell in love with our landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. And I wanted to be a forester ever since that time. And I've tried to dedicate my career to helping people connect to their natural resources. We share a passion for connecting people to nature across the Forest Service at every organizational level. And our mission at the Forest Service is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. And I said the nation's forests. And really, our purpose is to support nature in sustaining all life. Because nature matters. We all know that nature provides by sustaining life. And conservation is about making natural resources last for everyone in the long run. And we can make natural resources last if we take care of them together. All Americans from every community nationwide, urban and rural, including disadvantaged and underserved communities. We are all in this together, and that is why racial and social equity is a priority for the Forest Service. You know, the Forest Service has been working on equity and inclusion for the last several years, and President Biden's executive orders have amplified our work and the importance of that work. Because equity and inclusion means applying a lens to every issue we face and every decision we make. How will it affect all the people and the communities that we serve? In particular, how will it affect disadvantaged and underserved communities, tribal peoples and Alaska Natives, persons with disabilities, women, communities of color? What about our under-engaged communities? Have they been at the table? Have they had a voice in our decisions? Inclusion certainly comes with challenges, and we know that one size does not fit all. Rural communities don't always self-identify as communities in need of environmental justice. We might need to refocus this lens. You know, we lack the refined methods for identifying low-income populations that are affected by our decisions. But our scientists, our social scientists, our geographers are working hard at what this looks like in rural landscapes. And inclusion also gives us new opportunities to build connections between agency actions and community experiences, to place environmental concerns in the framework of environmental justice, and to see environmental and social issues in a more complex and cross-cutting terms, and to find new ways of engaging with underserved communities through various means such as social media and more. And maybe the greatest opportunity for the equity lens comes from broadening our ties to the communities we serve, and thereby laying a new groundwork for the future of conservation. You know, racial equity is a priority because we truly need national support to achieve our conservation mission and purposes. We need a truly diverse next generation to carry out our work. And cross-community divides, people are alike in a few fundamental ways. You know, I've rarely met a child who didn't like to get outside and explore in the woods or the outdoors of some kind. And this gives us tremendous opportunities. But people won't support our work if they stay isolated indoors, often stuck on their devices. And they will support our work and carry on our mission if we help them unplug, or at least plug in differently, and connect to all the wonders and awe and the beauty and the services that the great outdoors provides. And we need to facilitate this for people of all ages and all walks of life. So a great way of connecting people of all ages, as we know, is through outdoor recreation. In 2020, the National Forest System became very close to home travel destinations for many people living in the United States because of the pandemic. We had record visitation rates last year that were 2 to 3 times more than our previous years. And we think that's likely to continue. But we have a lot of work to do to make our public lands truly accessible to all people. We know we need new approaches to connect people with the great outdoors, and we need ways of distributing the health benefits of nature more broadly and certainly equitably. Take women of color, for example. Along with our partners, such as the Washington Trails Association, we're making efforts to improve their experience by meeting their specific needs. And different people use public lands in different ways. It is not a one-size-fits-all. Take different ethnic cultures. We need to understand the variety of ways that public lands and natural resources offer benefits to people. And that can improve our decisions and help us balance public uses with resource conservation. The first step is assessing our visitation. As our population diversifies, we need to assess whether our workforce and our visitors to the public lands reflect the diversity of our nation. And we are conducting, why is not my slide? There we go. We're conducting research on our various kinds of barriers and opportunities for access and using our public lands and how they affect different groups differently. The kind of research can help make our outdoor places safer and more inclusive for everyone. Take underserved communities in urban areas, for example, Latinx communities. They have access issues as basic as not having the right gear and not really knowing where to go or what the experience is going to be. So how can we better meet and understand their specific needs, as an example? And because different groups use their public lands in different ways, we need to assess our recreation infrastructure and facilities to align them with a full range of public needs and our agency goals. We can then tailor our institutions, our planning processes, our partnerships, and public engagement to meet these people where they're at, to meet their needs. And we can then make sure our policies and our management actions are not adversely affecting certain ethnic or socioeconomic groups. You know, just like our land management, our recreation management must be sustainable. The Forest Service has adopted a new approach to make recreation sustainable. We want outdoor recreation that supports ecosystems, contributes to healthy communities, promotes equitable economies, respects cultures and traditions, and develops stewardship values in the people we serve. And the new approach is about understanding and incorporating different cultural meanings and linkages to the land. It's about fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's about co-managing lands with multiple partners and considering community and ecological resilience. It's about really acknowledging the nation-to-nation responsibilities that we have with our tribal nations. And just like sustainable land management, sustainable recreation management is based on sound research. As you probably know, research and development is one of our core mission areas at the Forest Service. In fact, as was outlined in Paul's biography, we have one of the world's largest research organizations dedicated solely to the conservation of natural resources. We have 7 research stations around the United States, including our Pacific Northwest Research Station that conducts research in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. And it does include research on the social components of natural resources and outdoor recreation. So just to give you some idea, here's a few things we are currently conducting research on. Public lands as therapeutic landscapes that can benefit individual health, particularly among veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. We're doing research on our own agency culture and our institutional factors that influence the Forest Service workforce. I'll say more about that at the end. And barriers to outdoor inclusion and ways to promote access to public lands among traditionally underserved populations, including Latinx and Black communities. And the implications of recreation fees for equity and access to our public lands, as well as the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on the southeastern Alaska communities that all depend on tourism. And we all know we are all in this together, folks. The national forests and grassland comprise 193 million acres of land, an area twice the size of California across 43 states and Puerto Rico. Almost all of it is open to recreational use, to be used and enjoyed by the people that we serve. And outdoor recreation is by far the greatest use of the national forest system, with the most job creation and the greatest contribution to the national economy and to local economies as well. And that's a huge job and a tremendous responsibility. And the Forest Service cannot do it alone. We rely on partnerships and collaboration to manage the national forests and grasslands, sharing stewardship with the people and the communities we serve. And it certainly goes for outdoor recreation. We rely on our partners in the recreation community, local volunteers, local user groups, local businesses, local conservation groups. I'm sure you probably know some of them. Maybe you are some of them as well. So thank you. And one example here is on the Entiat Ranger District in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, where we rely on our partners to sustain our trails and our facilities. With their help, we can continue to offer great outdoor experiences for our visitors, helping them to connect to the land. But we know we need to do more to be inclusive and diversify our partnerships. So, the Forest Service, we manage the national forests and grasslands, but we also, as I said, conduct cross-cutting conservation-related research. But we also connect people right where they live and where they work, whether it's in rural communities through the support we give to our private forest landowners, or whether it's in urban communities where 83% of the citizens of this nation live. And one of our mission areas is state and private forestry, and it includes urban and community programs. A big part of our job is to connect people, connect them where they are, not where we are, which is most often primarily on the national forest, but where they are, right in their own communities. And so here's an example. The Urban Waters Federal Partnership is led by a core group of 15 federal agencies who engage state, local, tribal, and community-led organizations across 20 urban areas in the United States, and Seattle is one of those 20. And the partnership aims to improve urban water quality and reconnect diverse human communities with waterways. Through these partnerships, communities gain economic, environmental, and social benefits. So here's the Green Duwamish watershed in Seattle and the greater King County. The Green Duwamish watershed is tremendously diverse. It includes industrial areas, it has urban fringes and small rural communities, tribal treaty lands, and densely forested private and national forest lands. The watershed of Tacoma's municipal water supply provides habitat for 5 species of salmon. And there are many outcomes across the urban to rural gradient in this watershed and through the federal waters, the Urban Federal Waters Partnership, such as over 100 students have been supported in the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps to implement green infrastructure projects in their community. The partnership helped develop the Lower Duwamish River Restoration Blueprint and the Green Riparian Revegetation Strategy to improve the aquatic ecosystem and riparian health of the watershed. And the partnership also participated in and co-funded the application of urban ecosystem analysis tools such as the iTree Eco Assessment for the city of Seattle. And they conducted a valuation study of the Green Duwamish watershed, which showed an annual economic value of between $446 million and $3.3 billion from that watershed. So that just gives you a small touch of what we do in our state and private authorities, working with many others. So now let's turn to climate change and its effect on people's connection to the land. You might not think that climate has any real direct effects, but I think we all know it really does. Think of bark beetle outbreaks and the impact they have on scenic values for outdoor recreation, on sustainability issues for many forests, particularly in the West. Think of wildfires and the impacts on your ability to use and enjoy your public lands. Safety issues, smoke issues, watershed issues, ecological degradation. Think of drought and changing water flows and the impacts they have on water-based outdoor recreation, on habitats for aquatic and riparian species, on drinking water for our communities. All of this and more is tied to climate change. And climate change is the defining issue of our time for conservation, and it's tackling climate change is the top priority for the Forest Service. The effects of a changing climate will drive the way we manage land in the Pacific Northwest for the foreseeable future, for decades to come. And climate change will continue to be a cross-cutting focus of our work because forests and rangelands are central to climate mitigation and adaptation. As you might expect, climate impacts vary regionally, but in many areas, they will affect key forest and rangeland disturbances and process, such as hydrology, flooding and drought, invasive species, forest insects and disease outbreaks, and certainly fire regimes. All of this and more will create unprecedented challenges for people and natural resources for decades to come. And climate change will affect the abundance and the distribution of plants, fish, and wildlife that people need, subsistence foods, non-timber forest products, recreational hunting and fishing, and so much more. And these resources support households, they support cultural uses and social traditions. They help maintain ethnic identities among diverse populations, including tribal nations and Alaska Natives. So how do we tackle climate-related problems like this? I think first, we need to understand them. And the Pacific Northwest Research Station is conducting research on climate change impacts on resources with social, cultural, and economic value to diverse populations who rely on the national forests and grasslands. And mitigation is a key part of our response to climate change through sustainable forest management, because America's forests, I think we all know, are a major carbon sink. In combination with harvested wood products and our nation's urban forests, America's forests sequester and store almost 15% of the carbon dioxide that Americans emit each year. Forest landowners and land managers, both public and private, need to consider how they can alter their usual forest management practices to be more resilient and certainly to be more carbon friendly. And our research can help. The PNW Research Station has launched a new carbon initiative. We are studying how forest landscapes, how forest landowners perceive climate change impacts on their forests and whether their current forest management practices take carbon management into account. And we are looking into barriers to the opportunities for carbon-oriented forest management. And our goal is to help forest landowners shift their forest management practices towards climate change mitigation. Overall, the Forest Service has been conducting climate change research for more than 30 years now, since 1990. And we contribute to the national climate assessments that come out every 4 years. The last one was completed in 2018. In addition, every unit on the National Forest System completes a sustainability scorecard every year. The scorecards have been compiled since 2011, so we're 10 years in now, and they measure every unit's contribution to climate mitigation, to climate adaptation, to water sustainability, and so much more. And so here, let me give you just one example, livestock grazing. It's a major use of federal lands in the West, including the National Forest System. And the ability to graze livestock seasonally on the National Forests and grasslands helps support ranching lifestyles in rural communities. And climate change is currently affecting water availability and forage for livestock on federal lands as weather patterns become more variable and certainly unpredictable. And drought is becoming more common and more prolonged, and summers are getting hotter. So how can we meet the challenges? Our researchers are exploring some of the options. The PNW station is experimenting with new approaches to federal land grazing and new ways of grazing, how grazing management might help producers respond through adaptive management to temporal and spatial variations, certainly in resource availability. And we can't talk about climate change without acknowledging climate change effects on wildfire frequency and size throughout the West. Think about the changes to what we call our whole wildland fire system happening before our very eyes just last year, certainly in the Pacific Northwest. We had extreme fire weather across much of the West, record-shattering heat, tinder dry fuels. We had stalled weather fronts, hot and dry winds, dry lightning busts in unusual places. And all of it combined to start thousands of fires with phenomenal rates of spread. And records for mega fire size and rates of spread were set across entire regions from the West Coast to the Central Rockies. And mega fires roared across vast landscapes and through wildland urban interface communities. Areas normally too wet to burn have gone up in flames. We certainly saw that in the west side of the Cascades. And climate change isn't the only driver, but natural variability figures in the expanding wildland urban interface figures in, our past land management practices certainly figure in, but we know that climate change is definitely a major contributor. The average annual number of acres burned nationwide has more than doubled over the past 3 decades. And I'm aging myself, folks. That's almost 4 decades ago is when I started being a wildland firefighter. But 3 decades ago, mega fires burning more than 100,000 acres were all but unknown. We didn't even know, we couldn't embrace that 3 decades ago. Now we track them, we record them, more than a dozen in a typical year. Last year, California had 1 wildfire that burned more than 1 million acres. A warmer, drier climate is certainly one of the main drivers of these trends, and it certainly affects all people's ability to connect to the land. And we need to understand these trends to help ecosystems adapt to the effects of a changing climate. And you certainly know that many of our landscapes are in mixed land ownerships. The PNW Research Station is researching the wildfire hazard and risks across our shared landscapes of our national forests and other public lands that are intermixed with private, state, and tribal lands. And as a part of our research, we're examining how to encourage cross-boundary cooperation and wildfire management among landowners to reduce hazard and to reduce the risk at a landscape scale. And the station is also researching who benefits from hazardous fuels reductions on Forest Service lands. Are the benefits fairly distributed among neighboring landowners? Low income and minority populations are often more vulnerable to wildfire than others. Do they benefit equitably from our land management, including our hazardous fuels treatments? We are also looking at how wildfire affects recreation opportunities and experiences in some of our research. So I'm going to shift now to shared stewardship. We know that wildfires and other stressors respect no boundaries. Ignitions that start in one land ownership can easily cross a boundary and burn onto neighboring lands, and certainly vice versa. And mega fires can burn for miles across multiple land ownerships, reaching homes and communities and causing damage and even certainly loss of life. And we call it a fire shed, and the Forest Service has mapped fire sheds wall to wall nationwide in a national fire shed registry, because no single land ownership can meet the challenge alone, not even the Forest Service. We are all in this together across the landscapes and have fire sheds that we share. So we must stand together and rise to the challenge together. Based on our shared values and our shared goals for shared landscapes, we can meet cross-boundary challenges like wildfire, invasive species, and epidemics of forest pests and disease. So in 2018, the Forest Service launched a framework for shared stewardship agreements. And a shared stewardship agreement is based on a simple insight. We share, in this case, the fire hazard and the risks across shared landscapes. So we need to share our resources and decisions based on our shared values and goals. A shared stewardship agreement lets the state convene stakeholders across a shared landscape to set broad priorities together based on state forest action plans and other tools. Because we recognize our work currently, we have a mismatch of scale. So we're using state-of-the-art science to do the right work in the right place at the right scale instead of random acts of restoration. We share decision space and we place our treatments where they can produce desired outcomes at a meaningful scale. Our researchers have developed a tool that we can use for that. It's called scenario planning. Then we use all of the tools and authorities for improving landscape conditions, including good neighbor authority or stewardship contracts or tribal agreements, prescribed fire, mechanical thinning, or targeted grazing. We use scenario planning or some other modeling tools so we place the right treatment in the right place at the right time at the right scale to achieve the outcomes we need. And the PNW station is really helping us apply shared stewardship in the region through its work in a number of areas. Assessing landscape level natural resource conditions and ecosystem services that flow from cross-boundary forest restoration efforts in dry forests. Helping us understand how forest owners in Westside moist forests manage their lands for wildfire risk reduction and carbon sequestration and influence landscape level outcomes for both. And developing systems to measure the economic outcomes for shared stewardship and forest restoration activities, and to better understand the related equity and diversity in private sector forest workforce. You know, highlighting the role of partnerships in reestablishing sustainable recreation opportunities on landscapes following disturbances. And we have a big learning lab of what happened last year in the Pacific Northwest in doing that research. And the research is also on exploring the composition of forest collaboratives and the participation in the collaborative process to understand who is at the table and certainly then who is not at the table. Research about examining environmental justice implications of watershed stewardship along the wildland to urban continuum. And research to understand how and under what conditions shared stewardship can be the most productive. and finding opportunities for shared stewardship to improve equity in terms of who benefits from nature and forest management. Okay, folks, I want to talk a little bit about ourselves. You know, we can help people connect to nature if they see us live our own core agency values of conservation, service, interdependence, diversity, and safety. And that includes being inclusive, modeling integrity, investing in relationships, and treating everyone with the respect they deserve. But we can only do this, folks, if we do it first in our own house. So for more than a decade, the Forest Service has been on a learning journey to change our culture accordingly. And science has certainly helped. We need social science to understand the traditional power structures and the reward systems within the agency. Science can give us a deeper understanding of our organizational culture and our structures to help us understand how agencies institutionalize racism, sexism, and other biases. Science can help us find parts of our agency that have revised traditional hierarchies and norms and are operating in a way that fosters innovation and inclusion. At the PNW station, they're investigating the underrepresentation of female scientists in STEM and how to change it. And the station is also conducting research into diversity and inclusion in other operational settings, such as fire and aviation, using listening sessions and surveys. So we have mapped our journey as an agency towards inclusion. And I'll tell you folks, it hasn't been easy, and we aren't done and will never be done. It would be another complete seminar to really go through the journey, but I'll give you just a few reflections before I close out. This journey certainly has seen progress, but it also has setbacks. And the key is to learn from them. With the help of science, we started our learning journey decades ago in the 80s with a document called Towards a Multicultural Organization. And we began to embrace all the benefits we get from diversity and inclusion, just as we would see and how we know a diverse, healthy ecosystem. It makes us stronger as an organization, not weaker. And that includes diversity in disciplines. We no longer are an organization primarily of foresters and engineers. We are biologists, landscape architects, sociologists, historians, and so much more. We made diversity gains in the 1990s in our hiring, only to see them decline. In 2010, under new leadership, we launched cultural transformation, the effects which are still with us today. And in 2012, we went on learning journeys to other organizations. I was a part of that team. I went to the World Bank and IBM myself to study the breakthroughs and the challenges these organizations had towards diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization. And we hired consultants to help us really do a diagnostic on ourselves and to identify our systemic barriers in our culture and to embrace the systemic change. And one of those barriers in our diagnostic was a lack of a shared intention. And I won't go through the whole process of getting to a shared intention, but when we launched it, I was on that team that worked on that. There was 10 of us across the agency representing all walks of life and all places in the organization. But we shared it with the entire National Leadership Council on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, circling around where Martin Luther King made his "I Have a Dream" speech. And it may be simple, but every word in this intention matters: to create a culture of inclusion that awakens and strengthens all people's connection to the land. So as I said, it hasn't been easy. We have certainly had our setbacks. I was named as chief in 2018 during one of those big setbacks, but we have made steady progress. We're going deeper and deeper down into our organization to identify our subcultures and what is going on and how we are holding people accountable, cracking down on harassment, a new harassment call center, mandatory employee engagements and training. 22,000 of our employees, we had to stand up for each other to really know and hear and to listen to each other. I established a new work environment and performance office at the top level of leadership in the agency. And we had to anchor to who we really stood for and what it was clear the agency was about. And that's our core agency values. We call it, this is who we are, with behaviors and code of behavior and commitments to each other. It goes on, folks, but the journey is most important to be contemporary, to meet the needs of all people for the future. Our history is our history. Cultural change in the Forest Service has been going on since the agency was founded 116 years ago. We no longer ride the horses to the ranger station. We have evolved for the last 116 years, and we have more evolving to do. But we let our drive to improve the condition of our nation's forests and grasslands only to be outmatched by our commitment to one another in creating a workplace that provides for a work environment that is safe and respectful with a sense of belonging for everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to give that story of the Forest Service, our culture, and how we connect to the American people. Dan, all yours.
Well, thank you so much. Wow, you've been busy. It's so great to hear all the work and commitment that's going into the important resource work that the agency does, as well as the cultural work within the agency. We have received a few questions here that I will throw out at you, and just remind everybody who's listening that if you have questions, you can put them into the chat or put them into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. We have a few questions here from Kathleen Wolf, who's a research scientist here at the school. The first question here is, the U.S. Forest Service urban field stations have been doing important, insightful research concerning diversity and equity for some time. Some of the most interesting work is about social resilience. Might those investigators provide leadership in ongoing diversity equity efforts, including reaching out to rural communities?
Paul, you want to take a stab at that? Kathleen, it's good to see you virtually. I'll just say yes and yes. We're, quite frankly, our climate hubs that are USDA led, but we're a major player in that. That's helping us with a lot of connectivity between the rural to urban continuum on diversity and equity efforts. I think there's some more specific ideas, Kathleen, that you might have, but I'll let Paul speak on this opportunity space as well.
You're muted at the moment, Paul.
I don't know if I can address your question as explicitly as you'd like, Kathleen, but I think the types of work that we've undertaken over the last 5 to 10 years in our social sciences work is doing a pretty strong job of really starting to understand the different values that exist out there, and aligning and allowing us to take into consideration a broader set of values than maybe what we've done in the past. And I think that's one of the places where you look at like at the Green Duwamish, or where I think about is the Toutle River drainage going from Spirit Lake down to Longview, and just looking at the connectivity, and you look along that that gradient and all the different places that people interact and have values that are impacted by our decisions. And social sciences are critical for us to actually get a real handle on the value and the social benefit of what forest management decisions, what they impact. So, yeah. Oops.
Maybe we'll come back to that, but there's another question here from Kent Weiler, who directs our Center for Research on International Trade and Forest Products. Asks, you mentioned climate change and megafires. One of the great needs to mitigate megafires are restoration treatments and thinning. Over the 40 years since harvests on federal forest lands were substantially reduced due to spotted owl and other reasons, many small sawmills that relied on federal timber have closed. There are now areas that need treatments, but the nearest mills are at an uneconomical hauling distance, making it difficult and costly to conduct treatments on the scale needed. On the other hand, it's difficult to persuade investors to build mills where needed, but they are reluctant to do so without confirmed long-term supply. Are there any efforts underway that might help alleviate those long-term supply concerns and thus enable more small log processing? Small log.
Oh boy, this is you're absolutely right. It's a big opportunity space. I'll get to the supply in a moment, but we have to build back the restoration economy, and the smaller wood treatments that we need to do need to have an economic viable place to go, and hauling costs certainly are part of that, and where our innovation circles are and all the rest of that. So we do invest in wood innovation grants to catalyze that capacity. Of course, certainly our forest products labs that serves the entire nation, it's in Madison, Wisconsin, is leading out on cellulosic nanotechnology, biochar, torrefaction. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we're working on to advance these different technologies and innovation. So it's a chicken and an egg thing. We need the capitalization, and to get the capitalization, you have to have the supply. And of course, to guarantee the supply before we have the capitalization. So we're working with rural development and other folks. The sort of, to try to simplify it, is in the 2018 omnibus bill, we were given ability to go to 20-year stewardship contracting. It was only 10-year previous to that, and we do have some smaller 20 years. Of course, our large landscape that we're trying to break through here. Now, and quite frankly, with challenges, it wasn't to get the NEPA done on 1 million acres. It was in the forest restoration initiative in northern Arizona, and they had lost their milling or their restoration economy and infrastructure. So it's putting the parts and the pieces together. We're already have 1 million acres of supply. We just can't attract the right the right infrastructure for the right capitalization, but we're getting closer. We could have a whole seminar on this topic, but understood the dilemmas, yes.
Great, yeah. Bunch of connected issues there.
Yes.
Here's a question from somebody, Elizabeth Court in Olalla, often for work. Greetings from Kitsap County. She appreciated your presentation and wonders what you think of renaming Mount Rainier to Mount Tahoma.
Well, I'm not on the record. I'm just speaking as a girl from Olalla. Okay, certainly I looked at Mount Tahoma, and that's what it is to me. And we have a home on Orcas Island, and we look out at Kalmacolshan. It's not Mount Baker. It's the native is Kalmacolshan, and it's the only mountain that is a male gender. All the rest, are to be female in the Native American language. So I'm all for Mount Tahoma. There you go. Thank you.
We're recording this.
Oh, that's right. Thanks for reminding me.
We have another sort of market question related to demand and restoration activities about valuable biogenic carbon in restoration slash that is often burned. As fossil fuel alternatives, fossil-based alternatives have a cost advantage. Unfortunately, markets fail to acknowledge the environmental benefits of displacing fossil-based alternatives. Countries like Japan, which also has an overstocked forest problem, is heavily incentivizing the use of restoration biomass for displacing fossil-based alternatives. However, we don't have any significant national level incentive program that address this market failure. Can U.S. Forest Service lead an effort to address this market failure while addressing climate change? That's from Indranil, by the way, Ganguly, who's the Associate Director of our Center for Research on International Trade.
Yeah, I'm not seeing where that's written, so but there's a lot to unpack there. You know, God bless America. We are the United States. We have private owners, we have tribal, we have state, we have local, we have municipal, and you know the sustainable question for biomass, particularly in the European and now in the Asian markets, is certification. We want to know these are from sustainable sources. I don't know if I'm getting to your question, but we are leading an effort through our research and our state and private forestry arm on how we can try to satisfy some of those sustainability issues without demanding full certification down to the last 20 acre forest landowner of the layers. So we're working with the National Association of State Foresters and many others, and do plenty of trips. Well, we used to be physical trips to those marketplaces to try to create the picture of sustainability and what it's going to take to document that. Paul, do you have others to add there? And that it was quite a dense question.
Yeah, so in terms of the marketing part of that question, we don't have a lot going on from a P&W research station right now, but in our carbon initiative, trying to understand, we're pretty much focused right now on understanding the breadth of carbon, both from a sequestration, but also wood utilization, life cycle kinds of questions, and bringing in alternative management scenarios around alternative management strategies and how that translates. We've done a lot of work in that historically around fire and whatnot, but now adding the carbon question to that, and how does that influence some of the trade-offs and values and assessments around what are appropriate restoration strategies. Mm-hmm. And then we have, out of the Washington office, Carlos Franco Rodriguez has been doing, nationally, they've been trying to implement some various trials to come up with sort of field estimates of successful applications of biochar and biomass harvesting and looking at in some more detail. So from a research perspective, it's more on understanding how these systems would play out under different management scenarios. We don't have a huge investment locally. Forest Products Lab is a better bet in terms of looking at more of the markets and those larger macroeconomic types of concerns.
Yeah, the nature of your two answers to that question really point to the challenge of the carbon conversations around forests and forest products. There's both the research question of how do we measure forests and carbon in forests and carbon in products and bridge that boundary, as well as how do we set up the institutional structures that support and incentivize actions that result in more carbon coming out of the atmosphere ultimately. And so it's really complicated. Appreciate your taking on both those aspects of it. We are at the end of our time for the formal presentation, and we'll take this another second to thank you both for taking the time and presenting a broad, compelling vision for the agency and the work of the agency. And So many opportunities for connection, certainly to the work that we do here, and look forward to continuing that conversation as we go on. For those of you who are in the school, you should have received a link for a more informal follow-up conversation. So if you're willing, we'll ask you to sign out and sign back in on that new link, and we'll carry on with I think of this as sort of retiring to the back of the room and having a more informal conversation over a beverage. Wish we could do that. Okay, see you all.
Thank you.